Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I am Julie Cohen. I am the city manager for Jewish Fertility Foundation here in Birmingham, Alabama. And I have the privilege and opportunity today to go live with Dr. Jessica Zucker. So we're going to give her a minute to hop on and join. But feel free to type any questions in the question box at the bottom. But I am beyond excited today to have this conversation with her and share her knowledge and expertise with all of you. So give me a minute and she will be on soon. Hi, I'm so
Hey.
excited to have you here. I was thinking about earlier how people dream about meeting their celebrity
Oh,
their actual
stop.
celebrities. And to those of you watching, Dr. Jessica Zucker is that to me.
Oh,
Dr. Zucker, we're so excited to have you today. For our listeners that don't know, Dr. Zucker is based out of Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles area, and a psychologist who specializes in reproductive and maternal medicine. And she is also the author of this book right here, which for those of you that don't have it, you need to order it right now. And Dr. Zucker, I have to share with our listeners, just as I tell you all the time, what an impact you've had on my life and so many others. So I personally was in a Zoom doctor appointment with a reproductive endocrinologist, Dr. Zev Williams, and he is in New York at Columbia, and he specializes in recurrent loss. And for our listeners that don't know, I personally have struggled with infertility and loss, which brought me to my job at Jewish Fertility Foundation because I'm very passionate about helping others go through it. And I'm in the middle of this virtual doctor appointment with Dr. Williams, and he sees a copy of this book sitting on my nightstand. And he immediately picks up his copy of the book and holds up the book. We're both sitting there, like Birmingham, Alabama, New York, and talking about you. And
oh,
he then goes on to share that he actually is quoted in the beginning of the book talking about what an incredible resource this is to women who have gone through loss. So I know I've shared that story with you before, but I wanted to share that with our listeners because you are literally touching lives across the country and I'm sure across the world. Someone said they can't read the title because it's backwards, and the title is I Had a Miscarriage, a Memoir, a Movement. And if you search on Amazon, I Had a Miscarriage, you can get it on there. I don't get any royalties from you ordering it, but I do often
I
order
don't
it.
think you either. Yeah.
But I do often order it and send it to friends of mine who have experienced loss because it really is just a resource, and you get it, and you write about it, and that's all I can say. So I want us to go ahead and get started. If you don't mind, do you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit about your professional background?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm feeling quite emotional hearing about that. So thank you so much. And yeah, it was such an honor to have Dr. Williams blurb the book and for you to share that story with me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So, yes, I'm a Los Angeles-based psychologist, and I've specialized in women's reproductive and maternal mental health for, I don't know, maybe 15 years at this point. And what's kind of unique about my story is that I specialized in this field. So I was sitting across from women, hearing about their stories of reproductive hardships. So everything from fertility struggles to pregnancy loss to terminating for medical reasons, perinatal and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, and then some. And at the time, when I originally decided to specialize in this, I was sort of interested in all of this from a theoretical perspective. And I had tried to read all the books about it and study everything I could, read all the research and whatever. But personally, I had not undergone any of these things until I was 16 weeks into my second pregnancy, and then I miscarried while I was by myself at home. And I should just say, and of course, you probably don't have to say this here, but yeah, I mean, it's a total trigger warning to listen to the details of what I went through. As you know, most of you would know, a majority of miscarriages take place within the first trimester. So it's very, you know, unusual what I went through, and was, of course, incredibly traumatic and sort of changed the trajectory of my professional and my personal life.
Wow, I'm so sorry, and thank you for sharing. And for those listeners who do go and order her book, like Dr. Zucker said, it is a trigger, but I think that you sharing the details and feelings in the book definitely made me feel less alone, just in my own experiences. I think anyone going through infertility or loss, I think reading about it from someone who's actually been through it can be therapeutic. How do you feel like once you had that loss, how did that change the way you empathized with your patients or interacted with your patients? Was it easier? Was it harder?
Well, I mean, that's such an important question. It was honestly both. I mean, it's like you would think that because I had been studying this and it was like within my realm of what I knew and what I cared about, like that somehow I'd be able to apply that to myself, or but it was discombobulating to say the least. I felt what my patients had described, and even though again I had been empathic in my sessions and like understood that there's so much isolation and alienation after loss, until you're in it, until you've gone through it yourself, it's really just not something you can grasp. um, so I felt all those things. I felt alone. I felt befuddled. I felt confused. I felt, sort of professionally lost when I first returned to the office. As you know from my book, like I returned to work like a week after my loss, which was insane looking back. But again, at the time when you're living through it, you are just doing what you think is best. And there's something to be said also about the adrenaline of loss and the hormones. And it's like, I just think I thought that I wanted to keep going, and also, of course, showing up for my patients. And I didn't want them to get scared of what I had been through, which, many of them were afraid. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was incredibly humbling. And I think on some level, hopefully, I became a better psychologist over the years in its aftermath. But probably, soon after my loss, I stumbled around a bit in a way that only I could understand in retrospect.
Wow. How you went back to work a week later.
Totally insane. Well, I mean, yeah, the same went for my recent breast cancer diagnosis. I went to work, I got the call from my doctor and then I drove to work. My husband did not understand what I was doing. But again, it's like we want to keep our lives on track. And I think like when you feel that out of control, we want to sort of, remain in control in whatever way we can. And for me, my work is very meaningful and very grounding. But yeah, it was not smart for me to go back that quickly. Yeah.
I think, like you said, I think until any of us are kind of in that moment, it's really hard to predict what's right. And I think even when I'm supporting clients through Jewish Fertility Foundation, just because I would do something one way doesn't mean that that's what's best for them. And so that's hard, kind of to remove myself from that and remind myself that, everyone copes differently.
Exactly. Yes. And again, like sometimes it's only with the space from it, months later, years later, that we look back and we don't even understand how we made the decisions that we did,
Ah,
Are
some
you seeing
more
these
questions here.
below?
and I'm trying to get to them as they come. So if I've missed your
Okay.
question, I apologize and feel free to re-ask. But someone did say, what is your experience with kind of insurance covering kind of psychological resources?
Huh. Well, that's an interesting point. I don't personally accept insurance. I thought about it when I first started my private practice, and it just turned out to be sort of more of a struggle than a benefit. So basically, what I do is at the end of every month, I provide my patients with a super bill that they then submit to insurance for reimbursement. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those of you that are listening, if you live in a city where JFF is, we can help set you up. You know, we have a list of therapists, and some take insurance, some don't. And even if we're not in your city, feel free to reach out to us, and we can definitely help connect you with services. Because one of the questions I was going to ask later, but this is a great kind of gateway to it, is why is it important for people to seek help? And I always tell my clients, I don't care if you want to tell nobody about your journey and you want to keep it behind closed doors, or whether you want to post about it on social media. For me, that's therapeutic to be very public with it. But I do think getting professional help is so important.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you think that, and I did not pay you to say that. Um, yeah, over this kind of last, I guess, decade, because my loss was nearly a decade ago at this point. It's been interesting to watch. Some people come in, in a crisis after loss, and then some of those people stay short term and we deal with the immediate grief. And then others become sort of longer term and we get to take a look at past events. Because, as you know, loss can reiterate or stir up or trigger previous losses we've had in our lives, whether they have to do with pregnancy or not. And so the way we navigate grief has so much to do with our early lives and our childhood and whatever's happened since. And so it's such an honor when patients do actually sort of want to stay, and we get kind of deeper into who they are, why they are, and why the grief is experienced the way it is for them, and then to see them through, hopefully, another pregnancy if that's what they want, and on from there, you know.
Yeah. Another question I had for you was the power of social media. So, for those of our listeners that don't know, but you may have figured out by now, I Had a Miscarriage is not only a book, but it is Dr. Zucker's account on Instagram. And it has gone viral. She has lots and lots and lots of followers and posts amazing content. And it's been around, I think, for a while. So tell us a little bit about the background of it and just kind of how you thought about to use the power of social media to help others feel less alone going through this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I should sort of say this because maybe whoever's listening might look at my account. I have not been using my account very much, and especially not about pregnancy loss. I was diagnosed with breast cancer last year, and so I've been obviously bogged down with surgeries and recovering and dealing with such a whirlwind of events. So, but yes, I look back now and like the passion that I had for this topic and getting on Instagram and creating this community and changing culture was just so profoundly important to me. I mean, it still is. I just haven't had the time or the space. But so let's see. My loss was October 11th, 2012. And then I decided to try to get pregnant, as soon as my doctor cleared me to do so. Given my age at the time, it was sort of like a now or never feeling. And so I did, thankfully, get pregnant with a healthy pregnancy, I guess 3 months later. But obviously, it goes without saying that it was an incredibly fraught experience to be pregnant after pregnancy loss, which is a whole topic in itself. And I couldn't, even though I was thinking a lot about sort of how do I help people in a different way, or could I use social media or a hashtag or something to really reach people who aren't sitting in my office. I do have a background in public health, so I kind of like the idea of using that background as well. And so, reaching beyond the four walls of my office, which of course I'm not in my office right now because of COVID. But anyway, and so it really wasn't until I was on the other side of pregnancy. So my healthy daughter, was born in December of 2013. And so in October 2014, because as you know, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month is October. So I pitched a piece to the New York Times, and within it, I was holding a sign. You couldn't see me because I wanted anybody that saw the sign to be able to sort of envision themselves holding it.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign said hashtag I had a miscarriage. I wanted that to be the title of the piece, but they don't use hashtags as titles, whatever. Anyway, so that's the piece that sort of launched the hashtag. At the time, I was only on Twitter. I wasn't on Instagram. I'm still not even on Facebook. So I have a funny relationship with social media. It's like, I think it can be an incredibly powerful tool, but I also just don't want to get so lost in it that I can't find my way out. And then, so that was 2014. And I don't think I didn't know then what I was creating. I think I had a vision, and the aim was to really reach people globally about this topic and to normalize talking about it. But I didn't think I was going to start some campaign that was going to be multi-year and whatever. But then in 2015, I decided to launch a line of pregnancy and infant loss cards. And that's when I got on Instagram, because they're visual. I wanted to be able to show them, whatever. And then the community kind of took off from there. I used it as a place to talk about various aspects of pregnancy and infant loss and life after that I felt like, wasn't being explored enough. And it's just kind of gone from there. So I think my hope is that it has created, kind of a haven for people to feel less alone, and also to connect with one another, and to be able to, stop by there every once in a while and read something either from somebody else or from me that resonates in a way like, oh, that's exactly how I was feeling, but I didn't say it out loud. Or I was thinking that same thing, but ... whatever it is. And, it's still my hope. I guess the proof is in the pudding in terms of how many people have stuck around and how many people seem to feel connected. But it's a hard question. People ask me all the time on podcasts and stuff, do you feel like this has changed culture? Do you feel this has made a dent? And the answer is probably both yes and no. It's yes, I think the needle has moved, and yet, is there so much work to still be done? Of course. That was my answer to your question.
I love that answer. And I absolutely have made a dent. And I have to share, as one of your avid followers, that even when your account shifted with its focus to your journey with breast cancer, that it seems like a lot of the grief and trauma that you post about, I can still relate to. And I'm not comparing, infancy and loss with cancer, because those are very different journeys. But I never once, as a follower, thought, oh, well, now she's only posting about this.
Okay.
I definitely have been cheering you along the way, and appreciate, for those of you that don't follow her yet, I mean, it is raw, it is honest, and that's what I love about your account. So I personally have still felt connected to it and appreciate you not just posting to post, but posting what you're actually feeling and going through.
You. Yeah, I don't know. I'm in a bit of an identity crisis when it comes to sort of how to move forward within this community, to be honest, because of course I care desperately about this topic and about everybody that's going through it. And yet, like, because I've been sort of hit with this life-threatening situation, it's like really hard for me to keep giving and giving and giving in a direction that isn't connected to what I'm in right now. So,
Well, and you have to look out for yourself and your mental health as well. Dr. Zucker, another follower just said, I very much agree. The content still very much impacts me.
oh, thank you.
So that I'm happy to know, and I'm not surprised that I'm not alone in saying that what you post is meaningful. And I think you just need to go with, where you're at with your journey, and know that we're thinking about you and praying for you and hoping for a continued speedy recovery.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Zucker, one of the things that you mentioned in your book, and I think this is important to talk about today because for those of you that don't know, Jewish Fertility Foundation, it is a Jewish organization, but we do provide services to anyone going through infertility or loss. Our services are not exclusive to the Jewish community. But I definitely felt a strong connection when you talk about that Judaism as a religion doesn't have necessarily concrete ways to memorialize miscarriages, because in Judaism, it is believed that the baby doesn't have a soul or isn't a life until the baby is born alive. And so do you mind sharing, because you talk about in your book, how you kind of coped with that and how you decided to memorialize your baby?
Mm. It wasn't until years later. So like I said, my loss was 2012. And to be honest, because it was a 16-week loss, it was sort of like this nebulous, like between places. Because if you have a stillbirth, at least here in Los Angeles, there are very clear rites and rituals that are offered, so like you'd get offered sort of handprints or a lock of hair, maybe remains, maybe a funeral. I didn't get any of that. And I didn't even think about any of that in the moment, of course, even though, of course, like I had heard about so many experiences in my practice, but like because of just the chaos of what was happening, I couldn't think straight. So time went on, and it was like, wait, what do I do now? It's like, okay, great, right? I'm going to try to get pregnant again, and I'm going to hope that it's healthy, and the whole world is going to just hope that for me, and then pretend like the miscarriage never happened once the healthy baby is born. But of course, I knew for me that wasn't going to work and wasn't going to be altogether, healing or helpful. And so I think it was in 2017, I decided to gather people here, and we sort of like did this really interesting photo shoot and video shoot about memorializing loss. And within it, people were talking about their various experiences of what they did. And, some people plant trees, or some people have jewelry made, or some people, take a vacation and bring the remains with them, and sprinkle the ashes there, or whatever. So, in terms of how have I ritualized, I mean, it's actually, I don't have a clear answer because I didn't do something so concrete like that. For me, and I shared this on my Instagram page when I was going through it, even giving that baby a name was huge for me, or just so different for me. I grew up in a family of doctors, and as we're talking, in a Jewish family of doctors. So it's like miscarriage, it's not, is it a baby? Is it not? We don't need to get into that. But I felt kind of funny about giving her a name, but I also felt weird sort of writing about this loss over and over and over again without having a reference point of like, because clearly the impact was indelible. And so why not kind of concretize by giving her a name? Anyway, so yes, so in my book, as you know, my son was sort of obsessed, and I'll never understand why, why he was so sort of into this name Olive when I was pregnant. And I didn't even tell him I was pregnant, which again is a whole other direction of, should we share with our children about pregnancies and miscarriage? And but so that is the name I decided to give to my lost daughter. And for me, that was ritual in itself, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I still to this day am kind of confused about, my kids were or my son was at a Jewish preschool, and really the community didn't do anything. And yet, they send out at least once a week, about deaths in the community of grandparents or older people, whatever. So I don't know. I didn't feel held through that, coming from the religious community or the cultural community I was a part of. So it still is kind of,
Yeah.
I,
It's
I
it's it's such a hard I will say here in Birmingham, my kids go to Jewish preschool and um some of the more religious people there have just been incredible and incredibly supportive throughout my losses. But like I grew up in a family where, there's that 12-week rule.
yeah,
And what's this rule that, okay, we don't tell people we're pregnant for 12 weeks in case something happens. Well, okay, so then something happens and you're alone and you don't tell anyone about it. No, that's not how I operate. um,
right.
what if something happens after 12 weeks, because we know that it can and it does, and it happened to you. um,
Yes.
so I mean, I think that your account and your movement, is opening up these conversations and changing these topics. One question I wanted to make sure that we have time for today is, I know you say you didn't do much to memorialize her, but you wrote a book. You wrote a New York Times
That's,
best-selling book.
that's true.
So I would argue that you did more than most.
I'm,
Um,
I'm clearly I'm being hard on myself today.
yes, you are, and coming from a personality, I'm the same way. So how did you decide to write a book? Because obviously you do this for your career. You experienced it personally. You
Yeah.
write the New York Times article. You have this amazing Instagram account. But how did you decide to publish a book?
Yeah. Well, I've been writing sort of, I guess, my whole life in a way. I really enjoyed the dissertation process. I've just always liked expressing myself that way. And and so I was freelance writing, and then I started writing endlessly, I guess, about this topic, for various outlets, about various aspects of pregnancy and infant loss and life after. And at some point, it kind of dawned on me. It's like, well, how much more can you say unless it's in book form? And even though, of course, I didn't know I would get a breast cancer diagnosis, it was also like I felt like I wanted not a parting gift. I'm not going anywhere, hopefully, but you know, I, that I wanted to say something big and strong in all in one place. I figured like I've been in this topic for a long time now, and I don't know that I'll be able to be in it forever. And so I thought a book would be sort of a great way for it to coalesce, all my thoughts and feelings on it. Um, yeah. So, and I mean, I look back, it's like, what was I thinking? Oh, writing a book is crazy making and wonderful. It's a huge undertaking, and I am so glad I did it. But it takes a lot, especially, a memoir, because it really makes you vulnerable to, you know, people's feedback, people being triggered, and, uh, you know, putting yourself out there in a very big way.
Well, I'm super thankful you wrote your book, and I know that a lot of others are as well.
Thank you.
Um, I know that we are coming up on our time. So, last question: what advice do you have for our followers and our listeners who have experienced miscarriage, who have experienced loss, or whose partners may have experienced loss? I know myself, it's partners experience it very differently, and that can be stressful. But what would be your advice, your biggest piece of advice?
You mean like advice about how to sort of be compassionate toward oneself,
I
or
guess question, sorry, it was pretty loaded. What advice to our listeners who are experiencing loss, who may
yeah.
not light at the end of the tunnel yet, and what's your advice to our listeners who may be supporting someone going through
Oh,
loss?
yes. So I think the main thing, and I mean, this might sound, oversimplified, but it's like shoring up a sense of self-compassion, I think is really the only way to navigate this. I all too often hear like a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months later, like people saying to me, why am I still grieving? Why am I still feeling like this? I just want to move on or move forward. And would we say that to our children? I mean, maybe someone would, but I hope not. I think it's like, why can't we give ourselves the grace and the time that it just naturally takes? And it, again, it's different for everybody. And I think that's what's so difficult about it, and why people try to claw their way out. We want to feel good. We want to feel like ourselves, and we want to sort of get back to who we were, which maybe some can do it. I think that oftentimes these experiences transform us and we can't really go back to this previous person, sort of like, with body image and stuff, our bodies don't really go back after a pregnancy, whether it's a full-term pregnancy or not. So I think so self-compassion is key, understanding and sort of believing that grief knows no timeline and that we have to take the time that we need, even if you're like me and you go back to work too quickly. So that's kind of contradictory, but still, it's like, even if you do rush back to certain things, sort of building in ways to process. So whether that's through therapy or writing or, connecting with your body in some way, connecting with your partner. And then how best for partners to support. Well, that I could talk about that for a really long time, but the key there is the partner has to feel their feelings too. And so all too often in sort of heterosexual relationships, what I'm seeing is, the man feeling like he needs to support the woman through her process until she's doing better, and then they can get rolling again. And I try to encourage the men that I see in this context to, what are you feeling? Because in some ways it's kind of culturally rigged. I mean, it's not, I don't, men are taught to play this role. And again, this is a generalization, of course, but and so, but I think it can be kind of a bypassing of their own grief, their own feelings, and this kind of idea of like, well, someone has to stay strong. Mm-hmm. I don't buy it. And we can all fall apart and we can all come back together, and we can also, take turns. Today I fall apart, tomorrow you do, or whatever. So, I think partners being present, partners being empathic, and not trying to fix. There's no fixing.
Yeah.
There's no problem. I mean, this is heartbreak. And so, and then it like I said earlier, it affects everybody differently psychologically, because what is your history of heartbreak? Or what is your history of depression, anxiety, hope, grief, fear, whatever? So yeah, I think trying to come together. I mean, and as I said in my book, my husband and I were like flung apart, and I didn't feel like he understood, and I felt like we were in such different places for a while there. And eventually we did, of course, come back together, luckily, and I was able to really understand in a deeper, more meaningful way what he was going through and his fear, and how scared he was, and which sort of launched him into what I was describing, this kind of like caretakery role rather than being vulnerable with me.
I'm glad you said that though, because I know when I read that in your book, I was like, oh, this might be common that spouses are totally opposite ways. And I feel like my husband's moving on fine and,
Yeah.
but he's trying to take care of me. And so I think, again, all these topics are things that people don't talk about.
Yes.
By you writing that in your book, you're normalizing it. You're giving people, at least, even though it's not the same for everyone, you're at least giving them some more, I think, realistic expectations.
Oh, good. I hope so. Thank you so much for saying that.
Dr. Zucker, I cannot thank you enough for coming on today. For our listeners, you can follow her at I Had a Miscarriage. You can follow us, Jewish Fertility Foundation, at Jewish Fertility Foundation. We are currently in Atlanta, Birmingham, Cincinnati, Tampa. We just announced we just opened in Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Quickly scaling. So, like I said, even if we're not in your city yet, feel free to reach out. We offer financial resources, emotional support, and educational programming to people going through infertility and loss. And again, you have impacted so many people and hopefully even more people by coming on today. And we are just wishing you the best. And we look forward to keeping in touch and collaborating in the future.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me. It
Of
means
course. Have a great day.
you too.